Knowing what windsurf board to choose can be challenging. Knowing what size to get, what type of board to get, and when should you upgrade your board. In this video, I'm going to break it all down so you know exactly what boards to look for at all the relevant levels. Alright, let's start with the beginners. So if you've never stepped on a windsurf board before, this is where you want to start. Beginner boards are big, floaty, and stable. They make learning way easier. For reference, I weigh 85 kilos, and so if I was a complete beginner, I would want to be using something like this, a 210 litre Viper HD. Beginner boards typically range from 180 to 240 litres in volume. If you're on the smaller side and lighter side, go closer to 180, and if you're on the bigger side, go towards 240. The wider they are, the more stable, the narrower, the faster they move. So I quite like this board because it's a nice balance between the two. It gives you the stability to learn the basics, but it will also get moving in very light winds. You'll also notice a key feature of the beginner board is the dagger board. This is essential. It helps you to stay upwind and it gives you extra stability. So what can you actually learn on a beginner board? Well, you're going to learn all of the core fundamentals of windsurfing. The sailing position, which is basically just how to get up and go forwards, how to steer, how to turn around, also known as tacking and jibing, how to go upwind, and even the basics of using the harness. Of course, there is a lot more that you can learn on these boards, and they never really become obsolete. For example, using them for light wind practice is a great way to improve even at the more advanced levels. But for now, learning the core fundamentals are the main goal so that you feel comfortable before upgrading a board. Now, should you buy one of these boards? For some, it might make sense for you to buy your own beginner board, particularly if you're sharing it with a few people or if the winds at your local spot are usually light and you just want to maximize your time on the water. However, for the majority of people, getting a beginner lesson initially and then renting from a school or center is the way to go. It's cheaper and the extra value that you get from an instructor will help you progress much faster. Even if you don't progress onto a shortboard straight away, you might still end up downsizing your beginner board, which is much easier to do if you're renting. So how do you know when you're ready to upgrade your board? Well, basically, when you feel very confident with all the skills that I mentioned before. You're not going to speed up your progression by changing boards quickly. You'll speed up your progression by getting the core fundamentals right and then transferring those skills to smaller boards once you've mastered them. The most important skill is being confident sailing upwind. You should prioritize this because if you can do this, then you're going to ensure that you're going to be safe on the water and you can comfortably get back to the beach whenever you need to. It's also important to get good at this because it gets much harder as you start using smaller boards. Beyond that though, if you're confident sailing on a small beginner board around 180 litres, you're not falling in very often, you're starting to go out in stronger winds around 15 knots, and you're starting to get used to using the harness, then you're probably ready to move on to your first shortboard. A shortboard is basically just a board that's designed to get planing. Essentially, this is the feeling of skimming across the water instead of pushing through it. At its core, it's what really hooks everyone to windsurfing, that feeling of planing. So for your first shortboard, go for something in the range of 60 to 80 litres above your body weight. So if I use myself as a reference again at 85 kilos, I want to pick something in the range of 145 to 165 litres in volume. If you're super confident and you just want to push yourself, then you want to go towards the smaller end of the range. But if you want to take your time or you just don't go on the water that much, then I suggest going towards the bigger end. So right here, I have a Goya Volar 145 litres and the Fanatic Gecko 148 litre, which would both be great options if I was personally looking for my first shortboard. So these types of boards are typically labelled as free ride boards. You'll notice that these boards don't have a dagger board because you just don't need it anymore. Your aim is to get planing, so you don't need it. They're also fairly wide, which will help you to get planing as well as making the board more stable. Ideally, a good first shortboard will have multiple foot strap positions, which is great for when you eventually want to learn to use the foot straps. Okay, so what can you actually learn on your first shortboard? Well, you can learn all of the intermediate skills. So that's just getting comfortable using the harness, learning to get planing, improving your tacks and jibes, learning to beach start and water start, and even learn to use the foot straps too. So that's a lot to learn, and it will take you quite a long time to master all these skills. So for most people, this will likely be your first windsurf board that you buy for yourself, because it's a board that you will likely spend so much time learning the skills to become a well-rounded intermediate. Even if you end up upgrading your board and downsizing, there still might be days where you go back to your big freeride board. Now, if you have the option, I highly recommend having a go on a few different boards to test and see what you like. Whether that's going on a friend's board or renting one from a school or centre, it's a great way to try before you buy. Unless you're buying secondhand, windsurf boards can be quite expensive. So if you can try something out before you buy it, that's a real advantage. The more time you get on the water, the more you're going to progress. And at some point, you'll start to feel very comfortable on your board. And now you might want to start going out in stronger winds. Maybe you want to go a bit faster, as well as challenge yourself and progress onto a smaller board. Okay, so once you've nailed the intermediate level and you feel very confident, almost to the point where you feel like the board that you're on is slowing down your progression, then the goal now is to get onto a smaller board. Having a smaller board is going to allow you to go faster and is a way to push your windsurf skills even further. However, it's a very common desire for windsurfers in the early stages to downsize as quickly as possible as a way to kind of prove their ability and really push themselves, which is great, but be careful not to make too big of a jump too quickly. I think it's actually more important to be on gear that you feel very comfortable on, to learn the fundamentals and then transfer those skills to smaller and smaller boards gradually as you gain more confidence on the water. You're going to progress much faster this way. So at this stage, you might have found a board that you really like, but you feel like you're starting to outgrow it a little bit and you really just want to go faster and push your skills further. In this case, you might be able to find the same board, but then in a smaller version. For example, with the geckos, there are multiple sizes to choose, from 148 down to 100 liters. So you can use the exact same board, but smaller. So let's say I started on the 148 and I really like this specific board. Then maybe I might jump down to a 122 or even 110 as either my high wind board or a progression board that I'm growing into. So you'll notice that these boards are fairly similar across the sizes, so you're going to get a similar feeling. But as you go smaller in volume, the boards get thinner and shorter, which will mean that it will sink more when you're not moving. But once you get going, it will move faster and will actually feel more comfortable through the chop. Another point to mention is that as you go smaller in volume, the fin will also get smaller, which is going to make it harder to plane initially, but again, it will help you go faster once you're planing. A smaller fin is also going to give you less lift. So if you're struggling to keep the nose down and finding it hard to control the board, a smaller fin and a smaller board is going to help solve that problem. Now you might actually choose to hang on to your first board whilst you transition to your next board. This is a great idea and I personally kept my first short board even after I bought my second smaller board. This way I had a choice depending on how strong the wind was. I would use a smaller board when the wind was stronger and when I wanted to push myself, and I used a bigger one for when the wind was lighter and when I wanted to use bigger sails. So again, using myself as a reference at 85 kilos, I would choose to downsize to something like the 122 as my alternative board, whilst keeping my original Gecko 148 for when the wind is lighter. I might even choose something around the 110 litre mark, but probably wouldn't go any smaller than that for now. So what can you learn on this board? So on this kind of board, you'll mainly learn to improve all of the skills that you can already do, but the challenge is doing them on a smaller board. So that includes learning to improve your planing technique and go faster with more control, improve your tacks and jibes, start learning things like the fast tack and the carve jibe, get more efficient at your beach start and your water start, and begin using more outboard foot straps so that you can go faster. So a lot of stuff from the previous section on the previous board, but this time using a smaller board. So there are a lot of benefits to using a smaller board to push your windsurfing level, but just make sure that you're confident doing all of the intermediate skills before downsizing onto a smaller board. In particular, being confident staying upwind and also being able to water start are essential skills before moving towards specialist boards. Okay, so once you've got to an advanced windsurfing level, it's likely that you'll want to choose a board that is designed for a specific purpose. Whether you want to maximize your speed on some slalom gear, learn the latest tricks on freestyle gear, go out on the waves on dedicated wave gear, or whiz about on the hydrofoil on some specialist foil gear. There's no one correct path, and a lot of people will do more than one discipline. The truth is that a lot of the decision making will come down to your own personal factors. So for me as a freestyler who mostly sails in flat water, my main board is a JP Freestyle 101. And then when the wind gets closer to 30 knots, I'll jump down to a 90 litre board. If I feel like blasting around and going fast, I might choose to hop on a Goya Bolt, either a 107 or 117, depending on how windy it is and what size sail I want to use. So in general, the rule of thumb that I like to go for is picking a board in the range of 10 to 15 litres above my body weight. Going smaller when the winds are strong, around 30 knots, and then going bigger for when the wind is lighter or if I'm using bigger sails. It's quite hard to give specific advice because there are just so many factors that come into play. But here's just a quick list of some of the things I think will impact your choice. So what are the conditions usually like at your spot? What type of windsurfing do you want to do? How often do you go windsurfing? How much you weigh, as I've previously mentioned in a lot of the other stages, is going to be a factor. What is your budget for buying boards? And finally, what are your friends using? There's almost too many factors and scenarios to give some sort of formula or a blanket statement that's going to apply to everybody. And at this level, a lot of it is personal preference and a combination of all the factors that I've just mentioned. But a good rule of thumb is to ask around at a local spot just to see what types of boards people use, and then you can get a rough idea. Then you can also use that rough guide, as I mentioned, of 10 to 15 litres above your body weight as a benchmark for what size to get. But really one of the best ways to get a good understanding of what board is right for you at this level is simply by trying and testing a load of different boards. Whether it's having a go on friends' boards or renting them from a school or centre, that will be the most effective way to work it out. Alright, so hopefully that helps you get a better understanding of how to choose a windsurf board at each level. And now you can go out and get the board that's just right for you. Alright, so if you enjoyed this video, there's a good chance that you're the sort of person that wants to improve their windsurfing. If that's you, then you might benefit from some hands-on coaching. So I'm running some windsurf coaching weeks throughout the year where we take a group of windsurfers and just try and maximize their level in the world's best windsurf spots. To get involved, you can sign up to the waitlist by clicking the link in the description, and you're going to be among the first to know where and when the next coaching week is happening. As always, thanks very much for watching, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video.